What's good, YouTube? It's your boy, Beats by Ash, coming at you with another banger of a video. Today, I am going to be bringing you guys an update to my original Planeswalker tier list video with the insight that I've gained after reaching Mythic rank, which is currently the highest rank in the game. I'm going to take you through what I previously had cited before, and we're going to find out what I got wrong and what has changed after reaching Mythic. So I'll go ahead and start with the same order that I used whenever I made the original video. So first off, we have Ajani. So originally I had Ajani in the C tier, and I feel like Ajani is definitely in the low, I would say either the low B tier or the high C tier. I'm going to go ahead and put him in B for right now, and we may move him later. So the thing about Ajani is you're kind of going for like a tempo strategy that sometimes can get outpaced, and I feel like it's highly RNG based because ideally your win condition revolves around getting the Leonin Kincaller, which eventually can get you infinite value, and sometimes when they have that card, they can snowball out of control from that infinite value cycle. But if they don't see that card, I find it very easy to run over that deck a lot of times, so that's why I don't rate it very high, and I think it's very RNG based. So it's either in the bottom of B or the top of C. Next, I'm going to be going into Angrath. So originally, I had put him in the B tier, and I'm honestly going to put him in the C tier. While you can win with this aggro strategy, I just personally feel like there's so many better options to play if you're using this person. So number one, you could go Chandra and splash black. And number two, you could go Liliana and splash red. So, I don't really feel like this guy's signature cards are as powerful, and I don't feel like he adds anything really unique to the aggro archetype. I think the other planeswalkers personally just fit that win condition and that goal of that deck type a lot better. So I think we would have to see some adjustments to his signature cards for him to see play. So next up, I've got Ashiok. So I originally had put him in the experimental tier because I wasn't sure how he would work revolving around the meta, as I feel like his entire win condition as a whole is extremely matchup dependent, so it can change very frequently accordingly to what planeswalkers you are seeing most highly in your rank. So now I have come to the consensus that Ashiok belongs in the B tier, much higher than Ajani. The reason why I put him in B is because you do see a lot of representation for him in Mythic, not as much as other planeswalkers, but for a while he was a strong counter to Rawl, which if you haven't been living under a rock, is extremely oppressive right now. But the thing is, people have started to adjust their Raw builds, going the Tolarian build with the Sneak 7/7 guy, which gives you an alternative win condition to having to draw as many cards in your deck. And I think that the Raw decks now are a lot better tailored to win this matchup. Now, it isn't the worst matchup for you by any means. You can still easily win that matchup, but before, when people were going a much different build for Raw, I felt like it was much more highly favored. So that's why I'm going to leave him in the B tier. And now next, I'm going to talk about Chandra. So originally, I had put Chandra in the S tier, and I would definitely put her in the B tier now. I think below Ashiok is fair because you don't see as much representation of her, but you definitely can beat out some of the more control-based strategies, and it's definitely one of, if not the best, aggro-centric planeswalker because you have so many strong red cards to fight for early game board control, as well as your signature cards are all three, very playable, and I'm rating these people. A lot of this has to do with the playability of the signature cards because, some planeswalkers' colors overlap into other colors, and as well, some hero powers, for example, are not as impactful as others. So I'm going to go ahead and leave him in the B tier below Ashiok for right now. The main reason being that the drop is that I think that Domri is extremely played in Mythic, and I think that Domri is very strong right now, and a lot of the cards in Domri just go over the head of Chandra, being that essentially you both play out your hands, and whoever wins that matchup is whoever gets value trades on the board and establishes control of the board. And if you're both just playing as many cards as you can in Domri, eventually the person will typically get 3 to 4 boars added off of their passive, which will ultimately outvalue Chandra's passive of just doing 4 damage. So typically Domri is going to beat Chandra every time. And then in that respect, Domri, I originally had him in A, and I'm going to leave him in A. I think this Planeswalker is very strong right now, even though my idea of the build has changed drastically. I originally felt like it was much better to go for a fight-centric mid-range build, and now I have moved over to more of an aggro early game control build. And what I mean by that is you just establish control of the board in early game, and you can take some value trades with stuff like your grudge match to go over the head of other aggro strategies such as a Chandra or an Angrath, and I think he floats very well over those all-out strategies, as well as he has a very decent matchup against Raw. Now, I think he's one of the best people to go against Raw. The problem with that is right now is that the Aether Adept card, the 0 mana 3/3, is just so oppressive, man. Like, we need an immediate nerf on that card because it feels like when you play Domri or just anyone, if the guy has a turn 1 Scepter because of his Tolarian Academy and he has 2 of the Aether, it is almost impossible for you to gain back control of the board because it's such a huge tempo swing to where eventually Raw will just outvalue you. And not to mention, that can be used in more strategies than just Raw. I have seen it used in Jace. I have seen it used in Kiora. You can even use that card in Vivian. And I think that Domri has a really tough time getting around that busted opening. But as is, they cannot open that every time. And when they don't, I feel like you have a good chance of beating out Raw before they can get to their win conditions, especially when they are trying to Chaos Lightning and you already have a full board, so you're not a real threat immediately at that time. Likewise, if they do remove your board via that aspect, you can easily refill because of your passive, because of the cards that you're utilizing, and I ultimately think that the Ancient Forest land goes rarely well with his deck and has a lot of synergies with the haste cards. So now I'm going to go into Gideon. I'm not going to spend too much time on him because I don't think there's a lot to talk about with him. I originally had placed him in the B tier, and now I'm moving him to the D tier. I think there's very little potential to work with this character, as white is not as powerful of a color. For aggro or mid-range strategies, there are powerful white cards, but they mostly fall into the control archetype. And there's no real advantage to playing Gideon when you could utilize someone like Domri, who has a very similar passive, except his value requires multiple things for you to go right, and his guy doesn't stay on the board. With Domri, you get the value forever. So with this guy, you just get it for one turn. It's just simply additional damage when you think about it, And if you're able to use the Gideon one time, sometimes that's as equal value to someone as Chandra's passive, and you have to be able to attack with the Gideon multiple times in order for it to surpass someone like Chandra. And ultimately, I don't think that his signature cards are as powerful enough to bypass that aspect of the Planeswalker. Now I'm going to talk about Jace. So originally I had Jace in A, and while I do think that Jace is powerful in a vacuum, I think that his deck is not lined up very well with the most popular decks in the meta. So that's why I am moving him to the B tier, and you don't see as much play with him in the Mythic tier. If you go against someone like Ashiok, it's almost like you just press the X button, man. your deck is very much like tailored to, lose to this strategy where the other guy doesn't have to play any cards at all. It's just his passive just generically counters your strategy. And in order for you to get your win condition going, you just have a chance to randomly die. So while I do think Jace is powerful and there are a lot of different ways you can play him, I'm going to put him in the B tier because you can do well with him, but I think that his matchups in the current meta are not the best. So now I'm going to talk about Kaya. I originally had put her in the experimental tier because, her passive is very, interesting. And it gives you options, which options are typically very nice in online card battlers. The problem is that just like Angrath, she does things that other strategies do better, and I feel like she's also one of the most underplayed people. I would put her above Gideon but below Angrath for that reason, and I don't think that the signature cards are powerful enough to give you an incentive to play her over some of the other higher tier aggro strategies such as a Domri or a Chandra. Now I'm going to talk about Kiora. I originally had her in the S tier. That's probably because her starter deck I think is very powerful in low elo, but as you go up, especially in the current most played planeswalkers in the meta right now, I think that she can be quite weak as she loses to people who gain early tempo and gain control of the board, because in green and blue there aren't really any ways to deal with someone who is going wide, so you have trouble taking back the board. And if the other person has a fast start, I think it can be very hard for you to take back control of the game, especially when it comes down to you hitting the Leviathan that bounces to immediately to retain that tempo. So that's why I have moved her from the S tier down into the B tier, and I would probably put her either in front of Chandra, which I would like to do right now, purely on representation. You can do good with this person, same as these other people, but there are some matchups that are not as favorable to you, and I think Raw being one of the worst matchups, as it is hard for you to create a wide board that is better than other strategies, making you extremely susceptible to Chaos Lightning combos for game. So now I'm going to talk about Liliana. Originally had her in the A tier. I'm still going to put her in the A tier. I think she is very strong. I think she's very underplayed. I think she has a very good matchup versus Rawl, a very good matchup versus Domri. I think her hero power is going to become more problematic as the game develops and as we get more cards, because I think it is, in a vacuum, unfair that you get 1/1 counters and gain 1 life, and the relentless keyword being mostly tied to her specifically, is kind of oppressive in some matchups where, like Domri, if you open early relentless cards, all of your cards just trade with their cards for a +1 in card advantage, and you're gaining life, so there's a very low chance the person can burst you out. It's just, it's really good against aggro and mid-range strategies, and versus someone like Raw, because you're getting additional bodies, even when you get the relentless guys back, while you cannot block with them, they still block your opponent from using Chaos Lightning combos to hit you for lethal, and just not having to devote as many resources to take control of the board can sometimes just win you matches. So I think this person belongs in the A tier for a reason. And now I'm going to talk about Nahiri. Originally put her in the experimental tier, and I'm going to have to move her to the D tier. I've actually been playing with Nahiri quite a lot, and I think that sometimes you can, get lucky and beat over, some other slower strategies. When you draw stuff like Hellhound, the combos can be neat, and you can snowball out of control. The main problem for her right now is that she has good cards, and you have good early pressure, but your hero power is a little bit lackluster in the fact that you only gain the attack buff for that turn. There's only one card that can actually affect the viability of the hero power, you know, giving you an additional +1 on the blade, while other people just get a permanent value like Domri. So that makes it very hard with the meta right now, being that everyone is running 2 shock. A lot of people are running Abrade, a lot of people are running Pyroclasm, and when you develop an early board and they just have, you know, those low mana cost removal spells, it just takes so much for you to redevelop that it puts you in a bad situation. So you honestly have to high roll a little bit in that aspect and hope that you can snowball out of control. You can still do good with this person, but overall, you know, the removal in the meta that's popular right now is tuned very well to beat Nahiri. So I'm going to have to put her in the D. You know, maybe could be a little bit better than Angrath, to be honest. Actually, I think we're just going to put her in the C for right now, because I don't see this guy as much. I do see people experimenting with Nahiri, and I think like the mixture of white and red cards are a good combination of aggro pressure. It's just the removal right now is just really killing the deck, you know, and I think these people are just almost very rarely never played unless someone's completing a quest in Mythic. So this person I do just see, like, you know, a little bit amount of the time if people are playing it because they understand that there is some experimentation to do there, and you can win if they don't have early game removal. Now I'm going to talk about Nissa. Originally had her in the B tier, now moving her to the C tier. This person is less powerful than Kiora by far, but you do have that versatility, being able to use cards from any classes, which is nice because now you can run the best removal cards out of any strategy. It was just a big nerf from the beta where you were originally allowed to run 10 cards from any class down to 6 because green has good creatures, but other than that, it's, you know, it's lacking in a lot of other aspects. It's lacking in the AoE, it's lacking in the low cost answers to the board in the early game, and then you have other cards where you might want to run something like Plot in the deck because it's a generic good ramp card, and that's taking up 2 out of 6 of your slots that you can be playing. So, I mean, I think there are some things to be done here because the other guy doesn't know what cards you can be playing, and you can gain an advantage in that aspect, but overall, it's just a relatively weak strategy, and there are better options right now. So now I'm going to be talking about the cancer of the game. I mean, this guy is literally unfair. It's so oppressive. It requires almost no skill. You just play out your hands. Sometimes you can just beat the other person based solely off of RNG. Now, you know, Ashiok I think is very similar in that aspect, but your ceiling to high roll is much lower. With Raw, sometimes you discover a third Chaos Lightning and you have the potential to do 30 damage in one turn. It's literally like you're playing Yu-Gi-Oh! And everyone else is playing Magic because you're not constrained to the aspects of manas and cards having costs. And not to mention that this is also probably the best deck to abuse Aether Figment in, as well as the Isochron Scepter combo, because those cards are some of the most powerful cards in a vacuum in the game, and you have so much synergy with those already, and you have so many busted cards in your colors. You know, you have so many answered everything. There's almost no bad matchups. The worst thing that can happen to you is if you're playing a version that's not, you know, tailored toward Ashiok. Sometimes his passive, you know, just it becomes very oppressive towards you, but that's one person. It's also, we have builds that, you know, make the matchup much better. You know, Liliana can be a little bit hard sometimes, but you always have the chance to beat anyone. You know, no matter what the matchup is, you always have a chance to win, you know? And I find it very toxic that it's overplayed. I find that the signature cards are, you know, way better than some of the other strategies. You have cards like Mana Surge feeling like it's a mixture of you playing Druid and Rogue in Hearthstone, because you get all these busted spells, and at the same time, you can just gain an early mana advantage over the other person. You have Ember Mage, which is just a completely busted card. You have so many win conditions to pick from that you can kind of like adjust your win con throughout the game to whatever matchup you're playing against. It's just too many tools, man. You know, like everyone else has bad matchups, and this guy can just kind of like do whatever he wants, not to mention that the deck is relatively easy to craft compared to other colors. You know, I've seen a lot of people hit high Mythic with this person just running 2 Isochron Scepter, which could be the only epic in your deck. And if you want to go mega expensive, you run the 7/7 Sneak that adds an additional 2 epics to your deck, you know? There's almost no Mythics that can be argued to be put into this strategy, and you have a base chance to just kill someone on turn 5 for no reason. So, after all that, I'm going to leave him in his own tier. And now I'm going to talk about Teferi. I originally had put him in the D tier, and my mind is completely changed, man. First off, I think it's very hard to experiment with Teferi because the cards you need for his deck are quite expensive, but I think he matches up very well versus Raw. I think he can match up well versus Liliana, Domri. I think this guy is like the sleeper in the meta right now. He isn't played very little, so people don't know as much about the matchup. I overlooked him originally because people know what traps you can run and such, but I think he's probably the best control planeswalker in the game. You know, you have such a high chance to have that early game sustainability to allow you to get to turn 7, and once you get to turn 7, you can use your Day of Judgment to clear the board, and if you Day of Judgment with six or more cards in your hand, you're typically winning that game, you know? The only problem with him is that sometimes if the other guy accumulates something like too many stacks from your deck, like Ashiok, you don't have a lot of ways to have a late game win condition because you don't have a lot of burst damage. Typically, your win conditions are going to be the few flying creatures you have in your deck, and you're going to have your 2 second sun, which will give you that initial, you know, reach to kill the other person. And sometimes when you go against an Ashiok, if the guy gets too many stacks early and he's at 30 plus health, there's just nothing you can do. But I think that he works very well in the meta, and his matchups are a lot better than people think, especially because, you know, a lot of people can experiment with him because of his high crafting cost. So that's why I'm putting him in the A tier. Now I'm going to talk about Vraska. So I originally had Vraska in the B tier, and I'm going to leave her in the B tier. So Vraska is a person that you see in Mythic sometimes, not all the time, and I think that initially, when everyone started realizing how oppressive Raw was, they felt that Vraska was strong in that matchup. And once again, I think the way people are developing their decks with Raw, it's not as insane, and it's not as much of a counter. And for that reason alone, I think that lowers the viability of this person because you can do good with her, but the problem is a lot of these other strategies in the A tier and the B tier that you're seeing, they can just out-tempo you in the early game, and it becomes quite hard to take back control of the board because of the lack of AoE and tempo swinging cards in these colors, you know. And a lot of times, the best things you can do in Vraska require you to draw multiple specific sequences of cards for things to become, you know, very nice. You know, drawing the 2/2 that gives you a mana gem plus the artifact is great, but you're not going to always draw that. You're not always going to draw an enabler plus a finale guy. So in some matchups, it's just a little bit too slow, in my opinion, but I think you could do well with her. And now, my final pick, I originally had Vivian in the B tier, I believe, and now I'm moving her up to the lowest possibility of the A tier. The reason why I have this person so high is because I just see so many people using it in Mythic. Now, I don't think this person is the best, but, you know, it is a fair choice. You know, it's good, but my main problem with the Planeswalker is that the hero power is extremely RNG based. And one of the main problems is if in the early game you devote your mana, you devote your turn to storing a buff, and you don't get a stat buff, they can oftentimes easily remove your creature even though you got a buff, and it's like you just waste the mana to do nothing. You're not providing anything else to the game. It's also, this person's main color is green. You know, it's nice that you can use creatures of any archetype, but the spells in green are very lackluster. You have almost no, I mean, you have no AoE, let's just be real, you know, and the removal is below average at best. You know, the early game interaction, you're depending on you take control of the board early game and just continue to snowball out of control. There are some cards that allow you to tempo the board, but overall, I think if you lose control of the board the early game, it can be hard to take it back because it takes a lot to develop with a board with this person, you know? And if the other person is already in a position to, you know, being on the initiative, to be the attacker, that I think sometimes this person can have a hard time, you know, taking that back, because you gotta wait a turn to use your artifact, you gotta wait a turn to use your buff in some scenarios. Now, it is kind of nice versus Teferi because, like, the mana constrict or whatever, the trap that makes it to where if they don't use all of their mana, then you get that mana and unarm their traps. That's very good against someone like Teferi or someone like Jace who's running that card, because you can use all of your mana efficiently, and that's what's nice. You know, you're consistently, hopefully, going to curve out, which is good, but in some matchups, it's just, you know, too slow with the development, and it's a little bit RNG based. So that's all for the changes to my updated tier list after reaching Mythic. If you have not yet, please go check out my Twitch to see more awesome content from me playing this game and displaying strategies. If you are new here, go ahead and give me a follow. We are so close to 100 followers on Twitch, as well as if you want to join the community, go ahead and check out the description as well as on the screen for my Discord. We have about 50 people right now, and we are growing every day. As always, thank you for watching. Leave a thumbs up on this video and let me know what you would like to see in the next one, and hopefully I see you in the next one as well.